welcome. You're watching World 360 with me, Akanksha Swaroop. Now, in the decade gone by, much has changed in how India deals with the Gulf. And this week's visit to UAE and Qatar by the Indian Prime Minister bears testimony to India's transformative ties with Arabia. Also, Russia's most significant opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, has died in an Arctic Circle jail, drawing strong reactions from Western leaders, including the US President. Is the death of the Kremlin's fiercest critic another dark day in Putin's Russia? And the thorny question of presidential age limit is now growing in US political discourse, with President Joe Biden's age becoming a looming concern for US voters. We'll deep dive into our top stories, but first up are the headlines. Former US President Donald Trump hit with his biggest punishment to date on Friday in a ruling that fined the former president $355 million for fraudulently inflating the values of his properties. 47-year-old jailed Russian opposition figure and outspoken Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, who made global headlines when he was poisoned with a nerve agent in 2020, dies in prison. US President Joe Biden has pinned the blame on Russian President Vladimir Putin. Indonesia's Defence Minister Prabowo Subianto set to win presidential polls. The ex-general declared victory on Wednesday after preliminary counts. And the International Court of Justice warns Israel of perilous situation in southern Gaza's Rafah, demands immediate implementation of court order. Now, earlier this week, President of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met in Abu Dhabi on 13th of February. It was a two-day visit which began with Prime Minister's ceremonial welcome in the presidential palace. On Tuesday, the Indian Prime Minister attended the Ahlan Modi event at the Zayed Sports City Stadium in Abu Dhabi to address the largest Indian expatriate community. Highlighting the importance of inclusivity at the World Government Summit in Dubai, Prime Minister Modi called on countries to amplify the voices and priorities of the global south. And on his visit, Prime Minister and UAE President also reviewed the bilateral partnership and discussed regional and global issues. India and the UAE signed 8 pacts to bolster cooperation in key areas such as investments, electricity trade and digital payment platforms. The two leaders inked pacts ranging from a framework on the India, Middle East and EU corridor to MOUs on digital infrastructure and maintenance of heritage sites and museums. The two leaders also agreed on interlinking the instant payment platforms. The bilateral ties were further strengthened by key agreements, including opening a new IIT Delhi campus in Abu Dhabi. India and UAE also agreed to promote using local currencies for cross-border transactions and to interlink payment systems. But here's the highlight of Prime Minister Modi's visit as he inaugurated the BAPS Mandir in Abu Dhabi. It is the first Hindu temple to be inaugurated in the capital of the United Arab Emirates. Prime Minister Modi thanked the UAE President for his contribution in realizing the temple, calling it a symbol of unity and humanity. Prime Minister also said that UAE has written a golden chapter in the history of bilateral ties, adding that the temple will be a global symbol of communal harmony, inscribing the words Vasudev Kutumbakam after inaugurating this temple. Now, soon after his diplomatic triumph in the UAE, Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in Qatar's capital, Doha, on Wednesday. Prime Minister Modi also met his counterpart Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani. The two leaders exchanged views on expanding bilateral cooperation in sectors such as trade, investment, energy, finance and even technology. They also discussed recent regional developments in West Asia and emphasized the importance of upholding peace and stability in the region and beyond. Prime Minister Modi also held a bilateral meeting with the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Now, the timing of Prime Minister's visit to Doha has been particularly interesting simply because only this week Qatar released the 8 former Indian Navy personnel who were earlier sentenced to death on undisclosed charges. In December last year, Qatar's Court of Appeal commuted the death sentences awarded to the men and sentenced them to prison for varying durations ranging from 3 years up to 25 years. The court gave the 8 men 60 days to appeal against his prison terms, but they were pardoned by Qatar's government. On that note, let's quickly bring in our guest today, who is an expert on Middle East affairs, and I'm joined in by Dr. Wael Awad. Many thanks to you, Dr. Awad, for joining in. Now, be it the boost in bilateral ties or the first Hindu temple in Abu Dhabi, how do you assess the past decade of successful engagement between India and the UAE?
Well, undoubtedly, India is a natural extension into West Asian country, in fact, for centuries. Apart from the division that took place in 1948, India was continuous geopolitically engaged with the Arab world for years. And after independence, we have seen also engagement with the Arab world in terms of the expats and the oil, which was floating into India. But over the years, we have seen the Indian foreign policy have been emerging, and also India gained respectively in the international arena. And we have noticed that the Indian prime ministers have mainly focused on the Gulf after 38 years or 35 years of the last visit of Indian prime minister, which was Mrs. Indira Gandhi to UAE.
Right.
So when prime minister have visited more than 15 times the region, and he has interacted with most of the leaders, he also focused mainly on the Indian expats, which they are constituting around an 8.5 million people are there currently, and 14 million Indians visit the region annually with the huge revenue, which is more than $70 billion. It comes from there. So therefore, I think this is a major step forward, and it is a sort of a modern model bilaterally between India and the UAE to follow on with other countries. And I think his successful and historic trip was also marked with the launching of the temple in Abu Dhabi.
True.
And to be frank, it's not the first temple. There are many temples of Shiv's, Lord Shiva, Krishna in Bahrain and Oman,
In West
Dubai.
Asia, yes.
Gurdwaras are there. But this is the major and the largest temple built in India on the request of the Prime Minister, who have been granted the land for building this temple at 27 acres of land gifted by the President of the UAE. So I think all these factors come together shows that India and the Arab country, particularly GCC, enjoy a cordial and a strong relationship, bringing back the civilization between history bonds between the two nations.
All right, Dr. Awad, since you talk about the successful visit by the Prime Minister, his visit to Qatar this week has also been marked by a prior release of 8 Indian ex-Navy personnel held on espionage charges in Doha. What are the factors that underline the transformation of India's closer ties with the Gulf at large, which for a long time were neglected due to India's own overreach to the West?
I think India emerging power and economically, politically and militarily have also given advantage to the close relation with the Arab world, where most of the Gulf countries feel that India is the alternative to the US presence in that part in terms of security and tranquility in that region, what they have been providing for years, the Americans. So India proximity also gives it an advantage. Secondly, also we have seen the Arab countries looking east policy, which has been focusing mainly in India. And I think India, as an emerging power, have realized the importance of the import of oil and gas from this part of the world, which comprises around 60% of India requirement. And before even going to Qatar, they have signed an agreement to buy LNG from Qatar till 2047, will provide India with a cheaper price than China sold to China and to Bangladesh. So I think India have enjoyed it, and there will be a strong bond. So India security, oil security, food security, and expat security of a priority for any prime minister in India. And I think Mr. Modi have noticed that it is an urgent matter for him to strengthen these ties and ensure the undisturbed and sustainable flow of oil and gas to meet the Indian energy requirement, because India is an emerging superpower, as I said, and the economy of India will be among the top 5 or maybe the third, as he said, in this next term if he wins this election.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Many thanks to you, Mr. Wael Awad, for joining in on World 360.